Thank you, Scott, for a nice introduction. Thank you for coming here this afternoon to listen to me talk a bit. So this is a really interesting time to be talking about issues of librarianship, information access, education, etc. in New York. You may be plugged into the controversies going on about the proposed changes to the New York Public Library. It's not a Queens thing necessarily, but it certainly affects the entire city. In short, the board of the New York Public Library is proposing a set of pretty radical changes to its footprint and role in Manhattan. We don't know the details, right? They've been very closed about the details. But what we do know is that the proposal includes selling off the Business, Science, and Technology Library in Midtown, and selling off and closing the Midtown branch that's catty corner from the 42nd Street branch, and then doing some pretty significant revisions to the 42nd Street headquarters. There are going to be, well, some yet to be fully explained architectural changes that are controversial in and of themselves architecturally, but to the best that we can discern, the library will shift away from being a research library primarily and become the Midtown Lending Library. And this is, of course, after they've already shut down 2 other Midtown branches in the past 5 years. And so the books would circulate, but most of the books would be off-site, right, in a repository in New Jersey. And so the notion of waiting 24, 48, 72, or longer hours for a book is controversial in and of itself. But the real question that I don't think anyone's really fully addressed, and hasn't been debated publicly, is what is the role of that institution in the life of the city? And what should it be? Because one thing that's really clear if you walk around that grand building is that every day it becomes more and more like a museum. It's a museum with really good Wi-Fi, right? And that may not be sufficient. That may not be using that building to its full potential. Now, the library is not that building, right? The library is something that's embedded in every neighborhood in New York. It's something that every family has a story about, every family that grows up in the city. And of course, there are legendary stories about people using that reading room to discover amazing things, do astounding research. It is the People's Research Library. It is the place where people who don't have an affiliation with Columbia or NYU or any of the CUNY schools can get access to some of the most amazing collections and databases in the world. And actually for the CUNY Grad Center, of course, it is their library, right? So shifting away from its mission as a research library is pretty controversial. So what does any of that have to do with Google? I think what we're facing now, instead of a crisis, right? We're always expressing things in terms of crises. Instead of a crisis in terms of the role of libraries in our lives, in terms of the relationship between libraries and services such as Google, what we're really facing is a poverty of understanding in terms of the multiple ways that libraries serve us and that we interact with libraries. And by we, I mean citizens. Right? I think what we've found ourselves in is a situation in which the people who generally call the shots in our society think of libraries as delivery systems. Right? And they think of information as something that is delivered in more and more convenient ways every day. But they don't necessarily think of libraries in terms of their role in culture, their role in everyday life. What you often hear in debates among elites about the future of libraries is sort of off-the-cuff remarks like, who goes to the library now? Nobody ever goes to the library, right? Now we have Google. What do we need a library for? I actually heard that quote at an elite private liberal arts college in Massachusetts that was in the process of building a really elaborate state-of-the-art library a few years ago. And one of the members of the boards of trustees could not understand why they were raising millions of dollars and building this tremendous resource and sort of central spot when, after all, we have Google. I mean, that was, I think, an insight, right? This notion that someone so privileged would actually be so ignorant about the role of libraries in our lives, and someone with so much power, right? This is a guy who basically runs this college, and he made that statement, never having actually, obviously, walked around a library on a Saturday afternoon. And so one of the things that I think we have to understand as a society is that libraries are not one thing, right? Libraries are not one thing to all of us. Libraries are not one thing to any of us. Some of us engage with libraries for that purpose of the delivery of information, but that's the most simplistic relationship we can have with a library. Others use libraries because it's the one quiet space in their lives. Others use libraries because it's the one non-commercial space in their lives. Others use libraries, public university libraries, school libraries, because it's a meeting place for the community, a neutral space, a civic space. Others use libraries as a launching point for exploration, right? For a way of forging identity and connection, trying to find stories and sources that can help navigate their lives, right? So it's not necessarily about this very simplistic model of information delivery. If it were, we might actually say, what do we need libraries for in the age of Google? We might say, what do we need libraries for when everything's online? As if all this cool stuff that was online did not originally come from libraries, right? So that's the other thing we haven't fully talked about in this rush to fully engage online. Not only is the best stuff findable through Google originally from libraries, Google itself came out of a National Science Foundation library research project. The original algorithms that created PageRank, the core algorithm that helps us find stuff through Google, was the result of a National Science Foundation grant that Sergey Brin and Larry Page were on at Stanford University in the computer science department. They were trying to solve a library problem, which is basically, in the language of the 20th century, how do we catalog all of these web pages, right? But it really was, to them, because they're real smart guys, a question of how do you keep up with a fast-growing, exponentially growing, constantly changing collection of documents, and more importantly, how do you rank them? Like, how do you, if you can't deliver them all, how do you decide one page is better than another, or more relevant in their terms than another, right? So that was the problem they were trying to solve, and if it weren't for the very challenges, ethics, principles, and histories of librarianship, we wouldn't have Google in the first place, right? The good thing is the folks who work at Google actually get this, right, for the most part. They tend not to invite librarians into their conversations as much as they should. It's one of the reasons that Google Book Search as a search system is such a mess. It's also one of the reasons that Google Scholar is chaotic, because if they actually talk to librarians, both of those things might work better. Nonetheless, there is no such thing as this either or, right? We don't have the luxury of moving away from libraries because we have Google. We have Google because we have libraries. So libraries work in our lives in such a wide variety of ways, and we haven't fully taken account of it. So flashing back to the New York Public Library controversies, at some point, people in this city are going to have to say, what are the ways that we use the library? What are the ways we want to use the library? And what do we want this library to be? And the answer, I promise you, will not be simple. It will not be one answer. Here's the problem. A number of years ago, the New York Public Library hired McKinsey & Company, one of the most destructive consulting companies in the world. They have done horrible things to a number of institutions around the world. They're destroying things all over the place. I would love to write a book about McKinsey if I ever could. But one of the things McKinsey asked the library to do, which is pretty much what it asks every institution to do, pick something that you're going to be, and don't be anything else. Right? And so that's essentially what's coming out of this. So the 42nd Street building becomes one thing, a temple/lending library. And everything else it is gets scaled back. right? It's also going to be a museum, it's also going to be a cafe, it's also going to be a meeting place, all of which are nice, but this all comes out of this notion that you have to pick what you do best and do that thing primarily. When in fact, libraries necessarily do everything they can. Largely because very few other institutions do anything close to what libraries do. So this is the problem we have right now in society, right? We're also really lucky. We live at a time where there is no obvious information scarcity for most of what we want to do. In fact, we have just the opposite problem. It's an abundance problem. But I have to say that abundance problem is a bit of an illusion, right? Just because we have a lot of noise doesn't mean we have a lot of signal. Google's magic, Google's real value, is that it filters through all of that noise to give us something that we're convinced is signal. It gives us what we think we want. It reads our minds, in fact, right? Sometimes you don't actually know what you're really asking for, but you type in a few words, you might not even spell them right, and somehow Google takes you to what you didn't quite realize you wanted, but it always seems to get you there. And that sense of satisfaction, the simplicity of it all, that's really satisfying. So that relationship, right, our trust in that process, the fact that it seems so magical, that's what drove me to think about this institution, this company so much, and mostly think about us, think about our relationship with it. But it really all started in 2004 with the announcement that Google was going to scan in millions of books from the University of Michigan Library, and many more millions of books, partial collections of Stanford University Library, Harvard University Library, the New York Public Library, and the Bodleian at Oxford. This announcement in late 2004 was pretty earth-shattering. And it started this amazing cascade of conversations that weren't that different from that college trustees comment, right? Like, oh my gosh, well, Google's gonna just do what libraries have always done. We won't need libraries anymore. This will be so much cheaper, right? People were actually saying and writing things like that for a long time after that announcement. So that's really what sparked my interest in it. And ultimately, I came up with a book that goes far beyond the book project, but that really is at its core. Because the real question that I want to keep returning to is what sort of information ecosystem is proper for a democratic republic, or for that matter, for a global polis, a global citizenry. And I'm increasingly convinced that we're taking the wrong routes out of convenience, right? Out of a sense of urgency rather than real deliberation. Oh, this is quite, my little clicker's gone. Oh, okay, I'll just hit the button. All right, so what do I mean by the Googlization of everything? Well, here's what fascinated me. As I started moving my research from the book scanning project to all of our other relationships with Google, ways we're interacting with Google, it occurred to me that there were three major areas of human life: communication, knowledge, and our own identities, that were constantly being fed through the Google systems, processed by Google systems, and fed back to us. So these are the three big areas that are being Googleized. I had to say everything, though. It's kind of cheating. I don't really mean everything, but I certainly did mean a lot of things, and a lot of things that are really important to us. Right? And over the course of time, from 2004 until 2011, when the book came out, every month or two, Google would announce some other bold project that threatened or promised to remake and revolutionize information in the world, or identity or communication in the world. So it was a pretty wild time to try to pay attention to this. Early on, of course, I stumbled across the mission statement for the company. This is the actual corporate mission statement for Google: to organize the world's information and make it universally accessible. Now, when I came across this mission statement, I realized there's something really special here. I can't think of another company in the history of this world that would even dare to make this its mission statement. Can you imagine General Electric saying something like this as its mission, as its purpose for being? General Electric's purpose for being is to enhance shareholder value, period. And that's okay, right? And there's a lot of shareholder value there. General Motors, right? They're not connecting people across the globe with motor cars. They're not doing anything like that. They're, again, enhancing shareholder value. They don't mess with the mission statement. But Google has a vision for itself. And that vision is to organize the world's information and make it universally accessible. And I immediately asked, who asked you guys to do that, right? Who asked you guys? And look, it's the world's information. What makes you think you're in a position to do this? To organize, let's not pretend that to organize is a neutral term, right? To organize is to choose one thing better than another, one thing more appropriate than another for a particular context. What standards are you going to be using? What rules are you going to be using? Are these standards going to have openness? Is there going to be feedback built in? What are the consequences of this? Universal accessibility. Oh my goodness, right? This opens up so many different ideas. Who's in and who's out of universality? Does it really mean universality? Are we talking about everybody under all circumstances? Globally? Because that's quite a goal, quite a mission. What are you going to do when you confront the Chinese government? What are you going to do when you have to confront massive poverty that limits the technological rollout on which you're so dependent? What are you going to do when you have to deal with all of the ugliness that human beings present in our various expressions? None of that, of course, is clear when you look at Google's writing about itself, but nonetheless, they're becoming really clear as you look at what Google does in the world. So one of the early, in my early forays trying to figure out what's going on with this company, I came across an interview with Sergey Brin, one of the founders of Google, in which he was asked, what would the perfect search engine be like? And he responded, it would be like the mind of God. And that made me want to write this book, right? Because this is a pretty audacious statement. It's actually blasphemous. By the way, it's the Google image search of the mind of God, in case you were ever wondering. And it's not at all what I expected, actually. This idea, right, of omniscience, right? Because a supreme being is supposed to be omniscient, right? A supreme being is supposed to be all-knowing. And is this really what the founder of Google wants Google to be, all-knowing? There's a whole lot of responsibility going on with that, right? So again, what is our relationship going to be with this company that's trying to be all-knowing? And of course, the company is also everywhere, right? And it's incredibly powerful and rich, and it's omniscient, right? It sees everything, it knows everything, or at least it strives to be. One of the things I noticed as I was, in those early days, as I was raising questions and concerns about the book scanning project, about Google's role in our lives, and I was writing little pieces for a variety of publications, and writing a lot for my blog about it, is I was noticing that people had a real love for Google. Like they were defending it really fervently. Google was so important to them, to a lot of people. A lot of people I like and respect and trust, and still do. Were deeply concerned that I was raising questions about the one company that got it, the one company that was doing everything right, the one company that was standing up for a decent, sane copyright system in a world that is basically corrupted by big copyright holders who are constantly trying to ratchet up copyright protection. Here was a big rich company saying, no, let's open up the system a little bit, right? And that's certainly been my position on all the copyright battles, so I felt a little bit uncomfortable. I was actually going up against a lot of people who I respected and had been on my side of a lot of copyright battles. And I couldn't believe how much they bought the line that Google is, in addition to being omnipotent, omniscient, omnipresent, was also benevolent, right? Because the unofficial mission statement, of course, the sort of internal corporate motto is "Don't be evil." And in the early days of Microsoft, of Google, "Don't be evil" meant "Don't be Microsoft," right? Because in the '90s, Microsoft was nothing but evil, right? It was incredibly coercive with other firms. It was very coercive with users. It was violating antitrust laws all over the place. It was trying to install trusted computing way too early before we were all ready for it. Now we're all really desperate for it. It's a weird paradox, but so Microsoft was the problem, and of course Google was competing for labor for the best computer scientists at the very moment that Microsoft was at its peak, and Google was basically able to recruit a lot of people by saying, you will be part of a mission that won't be coercive, that won't be so closed, that won't be so destructive. You're going to help open up the web to everybody and make it much more usable. And we're going to do good things in the world. So this ethic of corporate social responsibility, of transformativeness, became really important as a core ethic of the company internally. It helped recruit labor, it helped retain labor, it helped energize people who worked there. A lot of people who worked there took less money than they would have made at other places. And they did it because they believed in and still do believe in the mission. So it was really important internally to the company. But oddly, it became important to many people outside the company as well. It became a reason to trust Google with all things. It became a reason to suspend critical judgment about the company and to resist being suspicious about the activities that the company was involved in. Now that notion to organize the world's information and make it universally accessible, that sounds awesome, right? That sounds like the sort of world-changing project that a lot of us who work in education or librarianship or the library world dream of doing anyway, right? Why didn't we think of that? Right? Why isn't it our mission statement to organize the world's information and make it universally accessible? I mean, it kind of is, but we're kind of busy, right? We're working on a few blocks around here to try to get the job done. We don't really have the audacity nor the resources to think globally, universally, the way Google has. So what the heck's going on there? Well, of course there's a deep and long tradition of thinking about universal knowledge or connecting people to universal knowledge, right? So, you know, it goes back to Alexandria, it goes back to Thomas Jefferson, it goes back to the original purpose for the Library of Congress, right? To give this sort of Enlightenment foundation, right? That if people have good information and know how to use it, they can be the best citizens they can be. They can be the best farmers they can be. They can be the best inventors they can be. They can be the best artists and novelists they can be. They can be the best parents, etc., right? But mostly they can be really good citizens. That's the Enlightenment dream. And the assumption was you give people a whole lot of really great information and let them run with it and trust people to do it. And as long as we're having reasonable conversations along the way and an open debate and respectful debate, we can go a long way. That's sort of the foundation of the Enlightenment. It's the foundation of this republic, and we've put a lot of trust in that. A lot of institutions like this are based on this notion. It doesn't matter where you come from. It doesn't matter you know, what your belief system is. If you're plugged into this rich system of information, amazing things can happen. We all know it's not that simple, right? We all know that plugging people into streams of information doesn't always generate the results that we had hoped. Nonetheless, there is a certain leap of faith there, and we've had it for a while. But what we've built lately is this notion that more is better, right? It's not just about the quality of the information available, it's about the massive streams of noise from all over the place, an adhocracy of information, right? That we can just put stuff up, post stuff, digitize stuff, and then sort it out later and figure out what's useful and what's not. And of course, utility is contingent upon all sorts of factors. And so we trust in this really powerful filter, Google, to make sense of it all. Because there's so much up there. And yet, in Google, what it really does is mask. It masks most of the stuff that we might encounter, so we don't have to bother with it. That's a tremendous amount of trust we put in this company, right? We are outsourcing judgment to this company, saying we know that there are 100,000 or 100 million sources that might relate to what I'm searching for, but I trust you to give me these 10, because that's usually what shows up on your first page and nobody clicks the second page. I'm totally trusting you to somehow come up with 10. And you know what? Google gets it right most of the time, or at least gets close enough that we're satisfied. What that means is we are immediately satisfied and we reward Google by clicking on one of the top 3 results on that first page, because nobody really goes below the top 3 very often. And that feedback mechanism keeps telling Google that, oh, we were right when we guessed that rank order. Of course, it might not have actually come up with the right 3 answers in the first place, but the fact that we never go any farther means we're telling Google that they got it right, which means it's less likely to change over time. And it's this sort of very closed circle of feedback. And that's really what's been happening for a long time. Except, of course, that Google keeps changing its own algorithms to spice things up a little bit and remeasure all over again. Right? And means that there's actually now a certain bit of unpredictability in the system. So we're trusting Google to be less predictable, and we're trusting Google to be more personalized. So one thing that's been going on for the last year and a half is that Google is now personalizing all of our search results to the best of its ability. Google knows a lot about you. If you're a Gmail user, Google knows so much about you, you don't even want to think about it. It knows you so much better than your parents know you, your partner knows you, or anything, right? Not as much as Facebook knows about you, but that's another story. But Google knows a tremendous amount about you, not only because it knows what you're sharing through Gmail, what you're writing, what you're receiving, but Google has an account in your name, or in your username anyway, and it's able then to track everything else you do through that browser when you're logged into Gmail. So if you're logged into Gmail while you're exploring the web on a particular browser, Google has a really rich record of what you're searching for, whether you're using Google or not. Google knows what you're searching for. Whether you are using Google to click on those links or using other links to other pages, Google follows you around and keeps a record of what you're doing. And this is really valuable to Google, not because they're after you, not because they want to exploit you personally, but because they're trying to create this tremendous mathematical model of behavior on the web. And they're interested in your data and everybody else's data, and they're interested in making predictions out of that. What that means is they know a lot about you, right? So if you have expressed interest in the past in British cars, and your friend has expressed interest in South American jungle cats, and you both search for Jaguar, you're going to get results that reflect your interests. Whether or not that's best or what you're really looking for at that moment, Google's going to reinforce what it assumes about you. Now, this is really convenient. This means you're not going to get distracted by jungle cats when you're after cars, and vice versa. It's really convenient. It's really good for shopping. It's not so great for learning. Because when you're learning, you're supposed to be surprised. You're supposed to be challenged. You're not supposed to be drawn into the same circle of sources and assumptions that you already occupy, right? You don't need to be told what you already know. That's not helpful, right? So when you're exploring something complex, when you're exploring something controversial, this personalization process is actually counterproductive. It's counterproductive in an enlightenment sense, in a Republican sense with a small r. It's counterproductive in a scientific sense, right? What we really want are instruments that can help us assemble a variety of points of view and a variety of sources of knowledge and be able to judge the relative quality of it, not just the popularity and relevance to us. So, let me give you an example. If over time, you have shown that you're very interested in the kind of things that show up on the Huffington Post. Right? Huffington Post is a very popular news source. Huffington Post aggregates news from small publications and large publications around the web. It's a tremendous success. It's managed to optimize itself through Google search, so Huffington Post results show up in a lot of Google searches. Huffington Post is a real phenomenon in terms of how to design websites and get them noticed, right? But let's say there's a lot of stuff on Huffington Post that you're really interested in. They have a lot of celebrity news, they have a lot of political news, they have a lot of opinion, and the opinion is often controversial, right? You actually have celebrity opinion news. Weirdly, like if you really care what celebrities think about global warming, there's a lot of stuff on there by that, right? So over time, you've told Google that you're really into this site. And now you're wondering whether you should vaccinate your child. Or, you know, you've heard some stories. So you start searching around for vaccination, danger, risk. Google knows you're into Huffington Post. Google's going to give you links to articles on Huffington Post. The problem is, Huffington Post has a bunch of completely untrue articles about vaccination risks. It's been running articles by crackpot anti-vaccination people for many years with no scientific validity. It's one of the many defects of Huffington Post. Most people aren't going to be in a position to understand that going in, so they're not going to search the Mayo Clinic site, they're not going to search the Centers for Disease Control site, they're not going to know to go to those sites right away, they're certainly not going to be able to judge expertise right away because they trust Google. This could lead us down some very dangerous routes. Jenny McCarthy, you may be familiar with for her various states of undress and other sorts of news, right? She is a major proponent of the effort to stop people from vaccinating, which of course is going to kill children and already is, but she doesn't see it that way. And when she appeared on Oprah to explain why she got into this movement, she said, I went to the University of Google. She used Google to go down these rabbit holes in the first place, starting a very dangerous situation. And of course, she has celebrity power, she gets to be on Oprah, and that has hurt a lot of people, right? And so this is the sort of thing that we might be facing because it's not Google's fault. And it's not necessarily any individual's fault. But this sort of blind trust in this one interface can get us into some real trouble. And using Google foolishly can get us into some real trouble, right? So the real solution is to use Google in a smart way. The solution is not to stop using Google. That's unrealistic, and it's actually unproductive. Google does some awesome things. Google has brilliant people working on really brilliant projects, and Google's made our lives better, almost exclusively, right? Done relatively little direct harm in the world. A few antitrust violations here, a few copyright violations there, but overall it's been a pretty great thing. But how do we live with the great stuff and minimize the bad stuff, right? So it's another way of asking, is this the best we can do, right? We've got the system that's great for shopping. We've got all of this material, user-generated content that we've been pouring out into the web, much of it amazing, some of it not so amazing, and we've got this really powerful filter that takes us through it and helps us navigate it. But again, is this the best we can do? Should we just be satisfied with the gifts that this one company has given us? And let me remind you just how young this company is. At this point, in October, it'll be 13 years old. In 2004, when is it going to be 13 or is it going to be 14? It's going to be 14. So its voice is changing. It just had its bar mitzvah. It's just achieving that certain level of maturity. In 2004, when it announced the project of scanning all those books, it was 6 years old. It was 6 years old when the University of Michigan and Harvard and Oxford and Stanford said, yes, by all means, you be the custodian of hundreds of years of knowledge and wisdom. You can run the show for us. We trust you. 6 years old. My daughter's 6 years old. That's amazing. She won't even use bookmarks. She drives me crazy. But the other thing is, at that point, 6 years, in 2004, when Google was 6 years old, it had been around for less time than Brad Pitt and Jennifer Aniston had been married. And look how well that turned out, right? So you never know what's really going to happen with such a young institution. And even today at 13, there's no guarantee that Google will be the Google we know and love in 5 years. I can already tell you that the Google of 2012 is not like the Google of 2008. And it's nothing like the Google of 2004 when I first started looking into it. It does everything differently now. It does so much more now, and it's in a completely different environment, right? So we can't trust Google much longer. We've actually had a really good run with Google. It's done a tremendous amount for us and made our lives really, really, really fun and interesting and convenient, right? We all have been able to use their map service very well and all sorts of other services to sort of simplify and speed up our lives. And that's been fun, but let's think about the next 50 years. Let's assume that whatever Google is today, it won't be anything like that in 50 years. It might not even exist in 50 years, right? Most companies do change radically and many of them go away pretty quickly. What do we do then? What about that vision for having universal knowledge? Because that mission statement that Google put up there, that's actually a really good one. As I said, why didn't we think of that? Well, we actually could rethink of it. We could imagine a way to do it. There actually aren't that many technological challenges to connecting most of the people in the world to most of the really good information in the world. Let's step away from this sort of universality. That's maybe too much of a promise. But look, connect most of the people who want good information to some really great stuff. That's not a big technological challenge. We already have the tools to do that. What we don't have is the political will to do it. We don't have the political will to do it right. We haven't figured out how to get over some of the big challenges. We haven't figured out how to confront some of the legal barriers, like copyright, like antitrust. We haven't figured out some of the other policy barriers, like how to deal with places in the world that are much more censorious than the United States is. We haven't figured out how to deal with some of the problems of language, some of the problems of access. These are all things that we should be talking through. By we, I mean people who work in education and libraries should be leading these conversations, not following, not panicking, not trying to figure out a place for ourselves in this crazy future. That's way too modest. We actually have a duty, a civic duty, a global duty, a human duty, to address these questions. And that, I think, should be our role, and we should be bolder about it. So that's why I've been advocating this thing I call the Human Knowledge Project. The Human Knowledge Project is a very nebulous idea, which is why I use a nebula as its symbol. Right? The Human Knowledge Project is about imagining a route to global universal information access. It's about starting a conversation where we get a lot of people together to sort of make a checklist. What are the things we have to take care of? If our goal is to make sure that a kid growing up in Zimbabwe who's 12 years old has no disadvantage when it comes to information access when compared to a child in Canada or Sweden, if that's our goal, let's figure out how much that's going to cost. Let's figure out what sort of barriers there are, legal, cultural, policy-wise, right? And if some of those barriers are insurmountable, let's adjust our goals. If some of those barriers are surmountable but hard, let's figure out how to surmount them, right? If we decide that that's not even worth pursuing, if that's just a nice thought, we'll dream about it, we'll sing Kumbaya, but let's not really work toward it, fine. At least we've had that debate, instead of outsourcing it to a company that declares it's going to do it without any real results, right? So it would be better to actually have a civic debate among players who have a stake in a 50-year vision, rather than just hope that some angelic company comes down and does it for us. So the Human Knowledge Project is not a tangible thing. It's a sense of an agenda, a long-term agenda, one that might be realized after most of us are gone, but that's okay. That's actually not so bad, because it means we might do it right if we're not in a hurry to get something going right away. Now, fortunately, there are many people trying to get something going right away, bits and pieces of such a project. So the Digital Public Library of America project that's being run out of Harvard University, it shares a lot of these visions. But it's a nationalistic project, and it's one that's encountering all sorts of challenges now, right? They're realizing the goal of digitizing collections and linking them to libraries, both public and university around the country, is not so simple for a lot of different reasons. They are going to have to make some adjustments to copyright if they want anything recent or useful in that collection. They're also going to have to deal with the fact that the very presence of such a collection might jeopardize local support for public libraries. That's a big challenge. And so there's this huge sort of bifurcation between people who are advocating for public libraries and people who are advocating for university libraries within that project. They're coming across all these conversations now, and they're having them out in an honest and open way, and it's really exciting. And they might actually build something. They might not, but at least they're doing it the right way. They're not outsourcing it and praying, which is really what we've been doing all of these years. So I have great hopes for the Digital Public Library of America, but I have one qualm with it. It is not a library. A collection is not a library. Getting back to my original point, a library is so many things to so many people, right? It is something that functions in our lives in so many important ways that we can't really even begin to count them unless we talk to the variety of people who are using it. Libraries mean different things to different people and play a role in our lives in different ways. But one thing we do know is we can't live without them. We wouldn't be as strong and as rich and as creative as we are without them, and we're not going to get any better without them. So taking them for granted is probably the worst thing we could possibly do. So I wrote this book not just to make us realize some things about Google, not just to help us become smarter users of Google, not just to open up a conversation about the sort of policy interventions that might be appropriate. Maybe we need better privacy protections. Maybe we need stronger antitrust enforcement. I actually think both of those things are true. And Google keeps showing me that I was right about that. But that's not the ultimate purpose. The ultimate purpose was to get us to think about what sort of information ecosystem would be best going forward. Do we want to do the things the way we've been doing them for the last 20 years, or do we want to take advantage of other opportunities and mount a real, full, public, and probably political process that does help us fulfill the great promise of what we've already started? So thank you very much. Charles, am I supposed to do something, some sort of, we're going to do some, we'll have a conversation, some Q&A stuff, but I think I'm supposed to draw the raffle.
Students in the audience, and we have 4 copies of Googlization of everything that we're going to raffle off.
So this is going to be weird. I've never done anything like this.
Okay.
All right, let's see who won this fabulous prize.
Check your number.
All right, here's a number 1027, 1027. No, nobody won. 1027 stepped out of the room. All right, here's another one. 1014, 1014. Yeah? You got it? No? It's not that good a book. Don't be hurt. You got it?
Who has it? Come
14?
on down.
I guess they all start with 1,000, so I'll just read off the last 2 digits. 23? All right, good. And maybe 2 more if nobody claims this. 25? No? Yeah, 25's back there.
Okay, on down.
So once again, is 27, number 27 in the room? No? All right, 27's out of luck. I'm gonna have to pick another one. 07. Number 7?
Lucky 7.
Ah, people are taking these raffle tickets and then just skipping out.
Yeah, 25, right? Yes.
All right, I'm doing this one now. 11. 11? Oh, what's going on? I can't give these books away. Literally, I can't give them away. 24. Are you kidding me? You know what? This gentleman really wants this book, so why don't we just give it to him? I'm going to get to your number soon.
Here. Oh, they were 16.
What?
24, yeah.
24? All right, 24 is there. Good. Come on.
Come on down.
All right, good. So let's have a conversation. If anyone has any questions or comments or thinks I'm totally wacky, let's hide.
A comment and a question. My comment is personalization is really weird because my husband and I sat together one Saturday afternoon with our laptops, and because I was working on a presentation on search strategies, we put the same search into his laptop and my laptop, and we got different results. The day that I can say to a student, sure, put those words into Google and I know what you're going to get, is over.
Right.
And the difference between them is my husband is a very visual person. He watches a lot of TED Talks, he watches a lot of YouTube, and sure enough, his first page was seeded with TED Talks and YouTubes. Because his copy of Google knew, gee, this man likes to watch things.
Very interesting.
Whereas all of my stuff, I'm a very text-based person, so I got PDF, 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 PDF. So my question is, I would suspect that there are computer science graduate students all over the country who want Google's lunch.
Yeah.
And is somebody building the next search engine?
Great question.
I can't imagine that Google has invented the last search engine.
So here's the thing. There are a lot of smart people working on search technologies outside of Google, but there are 2 things to remember. One, there's not a venture capitalist in this country who thinks that's a good investment right now, right? Because they would rather just buy Google stock. Google is so good at what it does that it's hard to imagine that an even better system is measurably or demonstrably better in terms of commercial return. Commercial return is about advertising placement. The very fact that Google can personalize so well is the reason that Google is able to generate tremendous advertising returns, and that's what venture capital thinks about, and that's what Wall Street thinks about, and that's what investors think about, and there's nothing wrong with that, as long as we understand that that's the game, right? That Google's job is to place ads that might get us to click on them. End of story. That is its real purpose for being right now, right? It has a fiduciary duty to return to generate returns for investors. And that's what it does, and it does a great job of it. And it does so many other things that are good for us. But once we recognize this problem, then we can adjust for it. For instance, you can turn off personalization. You probably didn't know that. Most people don't know that, but you can. You can also sign in or not sign in using a different browser. So you just open up a different browser. If you're using Firefox, you can open up Safari or Explorer or Google Chrome and not sign in, and you have essentially a naked experience of Google. It doesn't mean there'll be a universal experience of Google, because Google still knows where you are and justifies the results based on what it knows about the people around you, but it'll be a little bit less personal. It'll be, well, less personalized, but still localized. There are ways to adjust it. But in answer to your question of whether a couple of really smart guys right now or women right now can overthrow Google in terms of search, I would not bet money on it, no matter how good they are or how smart they are. A couple of things happen. One, it's A, really hard to raise money to do that. B, if they're so smart, Google will make it worth their while to work there, right? And thirdly, a lot of people have quit Google over the last few years and tried to do exactly that. So a couple of years ago, there was this search service called Cool, C-U-I-L, that launched, it must have been 2008. It launched in late 2008. Much fanfare. The thing was, these were former Google employees who said, we figured out some better ways to search. You're going to be really happy with our results. And by the way, we're not going to track what you do. It's going to be totally privacy friendly. And they actually had sort of a launch event, and they put out a lot of press material, and people wrote about it for days before the launch event. Oh, I can't wait to check out this cool thing. Well, of course, as soon as they debuted, the servers crashed because they had very scant infrastructure. Infrastructure is really expensive. If you don't already have a lot of money, you don't have the servers and the bandwidth and the code to make sure that your service stays up if enough people go to it. So the more of a success you are at attracting attention, the more likely you are to completely crash and fail. And that's exactly what happened with Cool. So it was basically out of commission for days at a time after its launch, and people laughed at it, and it became a huge joke. And a lot of people have learned from the Cool experience that maybe it's not a good idea to do this. So in terms of a startup, that experience is a really negative one for a lot of people, and it's probably going to stop that. The other thing is, one of the reasons that Google does so well for us is that it has 12 or 13 years of data, not just about us individually, but collectively. It has been following the web in detail and all of these different interactions. It knows what everybody's clicking on and has all these grand statistical models based on all this data. The data it has is so rich, and no one has anything close to it. Facebook has something really rich and valuable as well, but it's a different data set. And it doesn't really say the same thing about web experience. It says a lot about us individually. So Facebook has something really valuable too, but it's not anything like this. So that's number three, I think, of the reasons why the vast amounts of data Google already knows helps refine search, and not just about personalization. It actually helps Google deliver results to us in a lot of better ways. Then there is the infrastructure itself. Google is not just code, it's not just smart people. Code and smart people, those are portable, right? You can always have smart people and write great code. Google is billions of dollars of sunken infrastructure, glass and steel, air conditioners and server farms. They've been building this stuff for a decade. At the .com crash in 99 and 2000, Google was just starting up and had a bunch of cash from venture capitalists because it had started in 1998. So instead of retrenching like a lot of companies did, it did exactly what Amazon did. It decided to spend like crazy. And it bought all of the surplus servers that it could find from all those companies that were going out of business, pets.com and all those, right? And so it had this tremendous infrastructure almost immediately. And then it started improving and said, okay, we need to make sure we have redundancy in the system. We need to make sure that during major events like 9/11, Google doesn't go down, and it didn't go down. I mean, that was amazing that all of that user pull on Google on 9/11 didn't crash Google. It's because they had, over the previous couple of years, built up enough infrastructure, not anticipating a traumatic event, but anticipating that someday they would be that popular. And that's, again, something that without the billions of dollars of sunken infrastructure, you can't do. So who can compete with Google? Well, in terms of search, really only one company is trying, and that's Microsoft. But Microsoft knows that it'll never be its major avenue to revenue. So even though Bing is popular in a way, it's really only about 16 to 18% of search traffic right now in this country. It has a lot of pretty strong followers. People have it as a default search engine in some cases. It's really good for shopping. It's all about shopping. That's one thing. The other potential player is Amazon, because Amazon has that infrastructure. It has the server structure. It has the bandwidth. But Amazon's not that interested in search. Amazon just wants you to buy widgets from Amazon. So it's not interested in helping you navigate the rest of the web. That's not good for Amazon, right? In terms of competition for advertising, of course, Google's prime competition is Facebook, not Microsoft, not Amazon, not Apple. In terms of competition for your attention through your mobile device, its chief competitor is Apple, right? In terms of competition for becoming the operating system on your computer or becoming the place you go for word processing or spreadsheets, its chief competition is Microsoft, but of course Microsoft's still the industry standard and way ahead. So what a weird thing that these companies are all sort of dancing with each other, even though they don't directly compete in any measurable way. What are they really trying to do here? And what they're really trying to do is they know that this box is just for now, right? This is actually, it's so thin it's almost disappearing at this point, right? They know that this box has been with us for 25 to 30 years in various forms. It's stronger and thinner and lighter than ever before, but it doesn't necessarily have to be the way we do this thing that we're doing, because of course this box is tiny, could get tinier, could get lighter, could get more powerful. This box has a lot of advantages to our lives, right? Because this I have to go to, I have to haul around, I have to think about. This is now for special occasions. This is for every moment of my life. I sleep next to it, right? So this is a different relationship with this box. So these companies are looking at this saying, maybe we shouldn't be thinking about the box. What we really want to be is the company that manages the flow of data into your life, no matter what box you use. Whether it's this, whether it's what we now call cable TV, who knows what we're going to call it in a while, right? Whether it's your car, what comes through your car, right? This is one of the reasons that Microsoft is partnering with Ford to talk about managing the data streams into their cars, right? Because it's not about the box, it's not about the computer operating system, it is about becoming the operating system to your life, right? Because think about what this box is now, right? So now, Google actually produces the operating system for the majority of smartphones sold in the world. This year it beat Apple out in terms of new market share, not total market share, but new market share. And Microsoft just signed a big contract with Nokia to work to run the operating system for Nokia phones. Nokia phones are the most popular in the world, in the developing world, because they're stable, their battery life is great, they have a record of dependability, but they have never done a successful smartphone, and now Microsoft's helping them do an operating system. So the idea is not, again, step away from the phone. It might be glasses, it might be a chip in your brain, whatever it is, whatever the interface is, they want to be the winner in that battle to control the flow of information. So they're trying to lock you in as a loyal consumer. One of the reasons that these companies want you to be loyal to the brand is that when they move to the next thing, like they did for me, Apple had me hooked on this kind of box since 1984, and when they rolled out a phone, I went to Apple. Kind of by default, right? Probably not their best move, but I did that. And they know that most people do that kind of thing. So it's about the fact that no matter what technology you use to interact with this stuff, you stay within the lane, within that brand, and they become the operating system to your life. Because this phone is now the operating system to my life. I have this lovely assistant named Siri who keeps telling me she can't connect to the server. But I don't give up on her. I haven't fired her yet. I keep asking her more and more favors, and she kind of laughs at me. But nonetheless, Samuel L. Jackson has a much different version of Siri than I do. I don't know if you've noticed these commercials. Google run their map service. For how long, I don't know. Right? So that's the dance that we're really watching right now. It's all about becoming the operating system to your life. That's much more important and much beyond search. Google no longer thinks of itself as a search company, and even its mission statement is not about being a search company. It's about organizing the world's information to make it universally accessible. It may not even be an accurate portrayal of its mission anymore. It may be about organizing your information and making it accessible to you and making you accessible to it. Hi. Yes. Oh yeah, sure. I can move on to this one here.
Thank you.
Introduce yourself.
Thank you. Yeah, I'm Dominic. I'm here as a current student senator anyway. The first question I want to know that have you ever worked in Google before?
Have I ever what?
Have you ever worked in Google company before?
Oh, no.
Never, right?
I have no skills that Google would want.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
So,
I mean, Google
yeah.
wants much smarter people than me to work.
Okay, the second thing is that you said that if there is a guy who is smart enough is the first thing, and then the guy who is trying to overflow the Google, and then Google will make him as an employee in their company, right? So besides this, do you have any suggestion for the current college student to create their own way, the fastest way to get into Google?
Oh, the best way to get into Google? Well, actually, so Google will talk you through that, actually. Google has videos that will guide potential applicants through their testing process. Google's a very difficult company to work for because it has an elaborate testing process. They make you go through all sorts of puzzles and games and quizzes. It doesn't matter what position you're looking for, whether it's in public relations or marketing, or you're doing basic database design, or you're doing something more elaborate in artificial intelligence. Everybody who works at Google has to jump through these puzzles to show that you think in a flexible Google-ish way, Google-esque way, right? That you think like everyone else at Google. And that's not a bad thing. It means that you have a certain mental dexterity that makes you fit culturally in with Google. Google has managed to fill its ranks with people from all over the world. It is the most successful Silicon Valley company when it comes to recruiting women. It has managed to retain a lot of smart people, even though a lot of people have left for Facebook and other places. It's a really amazing place to work. It's a pleasant place to work for the most part. There are some problems. The contract employees get treated horribly, by the way, as they are everywhere in Silicon Valley. But if you're lucky enough to be a full-time employee of Google, it's actually a really good life and a very satisfying intellectual life. But if you go to Google's site, Google will actually talk you through it. But that's one of the reasons it's such a fascinating subject, because in a lot of ways it's a model company. In a lot of ways it's a model environment for working. It allows its employees a lot of autonomy. They can create little working groups to work on projects without having to fly it by the people at the top of the company. People at all levels of the company are allowed to challenge the people at the top without fear of getting fired. There's a real good sense of camaraderie. They get massages, wonderful food. It's a nice environment. It's also, in a lot of ways, a model company in terms of how to be successful as a company really fast, like deciding to work with people rather than against people in a lot of important ways. But as we're seeing now, it's reaching this level of maturity and encountering some serious friction. It's violating laws all over the place, chiefly antitrust laws and privacy laws. So it's getting in all sorts of trouble because there's a certain amount of arrogance at that company too. There's a thin line between declaring that you will not be evil and believing that you can do no wrong. And I think they've crossed over that line a number of times in recent years. Hi.
Hi.
Oh, I'm sorry, Charles is handing the mic back there. So, well, I guess we'll get to you next. Yeah. Sorry.
I have a class here, English 101 class, and For that reason, I thought I'd ask if you wanted to address how Google has reshaped the research process, particularly for undergraduates.
Sure. Well, it's reshaped the research process for everybody who uses Google, right? I mean, no one's immune from the seduction of the quick results. The fact that the quick result can often be something really good is, again, very seductive, very attractive, and sometimes we get hooked on that loop. And it may not be the best result, right? So I think what I suggest for undergrads is what I suggest for everybody, which is by all means start with Google, but understand Google's limitations and its powers. Understand what it's not giving you and what it's trying to give you, and understand that that may not be the best answer. That means that you should be checking with experts, you should be searching through other databases, you should be using other search engines on occasion. There are actually specialty search engines for instance, medical literature. You usually have to ask a medical librarian for access to those search engines, but not always, depending on the library you're working with. So if you're doing medical research, even if it's self-diagnosis, which is sometimes a big problem and fraught with difficulties, Google is probably the worst place to go. But the Mayo Clinic site has a great search engine on it as well. So these conversations have to happen constantly. Google is too good and too attractive for us not to say, you know what, sometimes it's not the best. We need to go a step farther. So it's a good starting place. It's almost never a good finishing place. But it's so convenient. And this is something we have to keep checking. Is convenience really the value that we want to make prime in our lives? I think this woman here, yeah.
You know, you've been studying Google for a long time, and I've been just looking recently at the information about Street View in the newspapers.
Oh, yes.
And of course, people say, well, they meant to do it or they didn't mean to infringe privacy. And so I wondered what your opinion was.
Sure.
And if they did, to what purpose?
Okay, so the background of this is that Google Street View, which launched at first in 2005 in Boston, New York, and San Francisco. Google cars with a camera mounted on top drove all of these streets and took images, still images, in 360 degrees, and then they were, the Google servers assembled them in a way that you can actually, and you've probably used this through Google Maps, you can sort of turn around a corner and you can see, oh look, Starbucks, Dwayne Reed, Starbucks, right? So it can be pretty cool, and it can be, and I always wondered, what people use it for, because it's clever, right? But so I asked people a few years ago on my blog and on Twitter and on Facebook, can you give me examples of real useful uses, right? Real utility to Street View. And I got some great answers. So people would say, I'm going to a convention in a city like Phoenix or something, and I want to know what the restaurants and bars are like around my hotel. So I walk the streets around my hotel. Or the most common answer, I'm looking for an apartment in Bed-Stuy. I want to see what's around me, whether there are broken windows, gang tags, whatever, or whether there are bodegas, something lively, before even making the trip, they can do a Street View and see whether it's a place they want to live. And that's kind of cool. And there were lots of variations to that. One of my favorite was a friend of mine who writes science fiction novels was writing a story where a scene was set on a particular corner in San Francisco, and this guy was living in London, so he wasn't anywhere near it. He kind of remembered what it looked like, but he needed detail, so he went to Street View and he walked the corner and he was able to sort of write all these details in his novel. That was pretty cool. So Google presented this to us as this pretty amazing service, and it's really expensive to make, right? Those are a lot of cars driving a lot of miles with actual human beings doing the driving and the photography. There were a lot of instant reactions about the very images. In Europe, mostly, a lot of people protested. In Germany, a lot of the privacy officials said, well, this violates our privacy laws very clearly. In England, people swarmed around the cars and stopped them in some cases. There are lots of Street View images from England with people giving various hand signals that one tends to see in England. And then, of course, a lot of pictures of people throwing up outside of pubs in London, which you don't really need Street View to see. But it was a really it was a very controversial thing in Europe, all over Europe. It was very controversial in Japan, and I'm just talking about the images. In the United States, it wasn't so controversial. People in the United States either ignored it or thought it was kind of cool and fun. There were a lot of pictures from New York of people watching television naked, but that's something people do in New York in their apartments, I don't know. But like people would collect those, right? And then people would start sending me images of other people doing embarrassing things that were caught on Street View, mostly walking around naked or urinating in public. They weren't that dramatic. Occasionally there were a lot of pictures of people with guns, like just walking around with guns. So a lot of interesting things happen on Street View. So again, very controversial. Then, about a year and a half, somebody in Europe discovered that one of the things the Google cars had been doing was picking up open Wi-Fi signals as they drove around and gathering the data and saving it. And that meant people's passwords, emails, web histories, all sorts of data flowing through. This had all been going into Google servers through those cars that were tracking all this Wi-Fi data. And this was bizarre. Why in the world would Google be doing this? It was a clear violation of European privacy law, not so clear violation of American privacy law, but a clear violation of European privacy law. So the Europeans said, what the heck? You need to start talking about it. And the official Google reaction was, it was totally a mistake. There was one engineer who set it to do this. He didn't mean anything bad by it. We've never used the data. Let's just forget about it. Trust us, we're Google. And a lot of people bought that. A lot of people said, oh, it was just a mistake. It was a mistake, right? Well, it turns out it wasn't really a mistake. It turns out that, as we found out in the last few weeks, this engineer actually ran the project by his superiors. So a lot of people at Google knew what was going on. They've still retained the data after all these years. And they refuse to cooperate with investigations either in Europe or the United States about it, because now there are new investigations in the United States because now there may be questions of fraud. And there may be violations of wiretap acts, depending on how they've done this. But of course, you don't know if there's a violation if you can't get the data and you can't get Google to cooperate. And so far, the engineer has taken the fifth and doesn't want to deal with officials. So they're stonewalling completely. All I can say is I told you so. Now, nothing Google has done is obviously illegal in the United States. A lot of what Google has done is pretty obviously illegal in Europe. And Google is likely to face some pretty stiff penalties in Europe. Google has already faced modest penalties from the Federal Trade Commission for other privacy violations involving Google's previous social network effort, which was a disaster, but it also completely violated its own privacy policy. And so the FTC cracked down on Google then and just last week fined Google for another privacy violation. So there are ways Google's getting in trouble for that, but this Street View Wi-Fi spying scandal is actually pretty huge. And the fact that Google is being intransigent about it is a pretty difficult situation to deal with. And so, Google might be innocent. It might really be a more complex and compounded mistake, but still a fairly innocent mistake. Maybe, but we can't know because Google considers itself to be above the law in this case, so it won't even cooperate, and this is a big problem. We're now waiting to see whether Congress and the Federal Trade Commission and the Justice Department want to push Google on this matter. And it'll be a while till we see what really happens out of this. But I think what it really goes to show is that Google had some reason for thinking that this would help the company do something. And it did what it thought was good for the company, and that's what companies do. And that's why we need regulations to stop companies from crossing lines that hurt people. And that used to be a pretty common sense notion in this country, but since we've basically become allergic to all reasonable regulations, that becomes kind of an absurd thing to suggest. The companies will do what's good for them, and we, the people, should draw a line and say, don't cross this line, and if you do, you'll be penalized. That simple formula is no longer part of our political economy. Now it's all about trusting companies that purport to be good to us.
There's a question over here.
So I've been thinking a lot about app development lately,
Okay.
and the role that apps currently play in the way internet use is changing.
Good.
And so we all know Facebook decided Instagram was worth $1 billion, right? They pay $1 billion for access to that intellectual property and infrastructure. So I'm wondering if you have any insights into how Google is dealing with the changing landscape in a move towards app-based internet use.
So when you say app-based internet use, that's really interesting because it's not always internet use. It's app-based data use, right? So the internet, capital T, capital I, doesn't really exist. The internet is a word we use to mean the network of networks connected by TCP/IP, routed along similar fashions that make all of this data exchange easy and open and customizable. And that's an amazing thing that we almost have globally. It's not really global, but that's created this amazingly fertile place for all this creativity and all this great stuff. I'm not sure how much longer we're gonna have that situation. We see consistently across the world nation states balkanizing themselves and creating their own degraded versions of that network of networks, heavily censored version, not just China. India's doing it, Turkey's doing it, France is doing it. The United States is talking about doing it in various ways, occasionally with under the guise of security. So there are all sorts of policy things threatening this idea of a global network of networks that I think we take for granted too much. We should actually be fighting for a more open internet rather than just surrendering and assuming that it's necessarily baked into the algorithms or baked into the protocols. So with the notion that more and more of our activities are moving to these apps on these small devices threatens Google in a direct way because of course Google wants you to spend as much time on the old open web as possible. The more time you spend on the open web, the more Google is in a favorable position to monitor what you're doing and sell ads to you, right? Or present ads to you that you then click on, so it sells ads to Google's real customers, the ad companies and these firms, because you're not Google's customers, you're just its users. You're its product, actually. You're what Google sells to advertisers. But the more time we spend with apps, right? If I'm engaging with a flow of data through an app, like the New York Times app on my iPad, rather than going to nytimes.com on a web browser, Google loses. Google gets none of that information, doesn't get to learn from me about that, doesn't get to place ads as I search for things, as I move away. I'm out of that environment. Google's understood this for a long time, that apps are attractive, the more time we spend with them, the less time we spend with the web. That's one of the reasons that Google went so strongly into the mobile platform business, because at least on an Android phone, Google gets to monitor that. Again, all part of this effort to be the operating system of your life. Get some way of monitoring and managing that data. So Google's quite aware of it. Google's into app development. It's trying to help programmers, app programmers, do the most creative things on the Android platform. And that's all very good. It's all very creative. And hopefully the Android platform gets more open than it's already been, but there's not much hope for that because the phone companies won't let Google do what it wants to do. So we're in this situation where, sort of in a historical sense, think about it, 5 to 10 years from now, this thing called the web might not matter to us at all. It might just be the place where porn's available, right? It might be a quaint memory, right? Because all of our important data flows are going through much more secure channels, more proprietary channels, more predictable channels, more trustworthy channels. That's a very attractive vision for a lot of things. Would you rather do banking through an open website over your Wi-Fi network where anyone can pick up the data? Or would you rather do your banking through a trusted app on a secure operating system that has a direct connection to your bank? I mean, once you start thinking about it, it's, of course I want to do it through the app, right? And I would rather trust AT&T to manage that data than my Wi-Fi hub at home as the sort of first mile of that connection. So those are all things going through our minds as we make these choices. So that's one of the big challenges that we have. And again, so Google knows that the old game that it's worked for it so well is probably not long with us.
Well, any other questions? Anybody else? Yes.
Thank you so much for this presentation.
Oh, sure.
In one of my favorite books, which is The Anarchist in the Library, you wrote on page 39, unbridled technology is seductive and potentially destructive. information can be a weapon of oppression as well as of liberation.
Wow, that was pretty good.
Yeah, that was really. I actually have that quote saved, and I've used it in my classes, and had students discuss how that applies.
Oh, cool.
As a librarian, we very often look at the things that we try to instruct students with, and what I've seen among my colleagues and even among for myself is sometimes we try to Googleize too much. How do we confront that with this all-powerful gadget that we have, which is Google?
Well, so one advantage that librarians have over Google is deep history and tradition and a sense of community, right? So I always urge librarians to be bold and confident about their role in the world rather than trying to constantly pander to the perceived or the assumed desires of some constituency. That is always fleeting, always changing, and doesn't always fully grasp the complexity of what's going on here, right? So every librarian who is engaged with this issue knows that step one is to try to explain to someone who's seeking help how these systems work to the best of their ability, right? So we need a better sense, we need a sense of demystification, right? So demystification has two goals. By demystifying Google, by making sure that people understand it's not some magic force, that it's not some wizard behind the curtain, or that it is some little guy behind the curtain, not the wizard, right? By demystifying the technology, you accomplish two major things. Number one, you actually can generate respect for the people who work in these fields. And I think this is really important, right? If I look at this box and I think of this as a piece of magic, if I look at this box and I say, that is amazing that I can get all that cool stuff. I can play World of Warcraft on this little thin, I don't know how much is this, 5.4 pound device? And how does it do it? It's like there's no room for anything in there, right? If I just stop thinking about what's going on in there or refuse to be curious about what's going on in there and assume it's all magic and that it's a given, right? This just happens in the world. We have stuff like this. It's just a given. At that point, I cannot see the human hands that have touched this. I can't appreciate the tremendous skill and effort that went into designing it, to designing its beautiful shell, to designing the layout of the innards, which is actually pretty stunning if you've ever opened up one of these things to see exactly how efficiently it's all laid out. I don't get to respect the people who worked 14 hours in a factory in China assembling it, who really deserve our respect, right? We don't get to see that there is human cost and human benefit here, that there's human ingenuity and there's sweat and there's blood attached to this. And when you recognize all of that, once you've demystified the technological element and you see the human element in there, then you can actually lend respect to the people who worked in it. So when I talk about Google, I try my best to make it clear that the people who work at Google are amazing people who have trained themselves for years to answer some of the most complex and interesting questions going on. They're trying to figure out how to translate Swahili into Malayalam without having a Swahili or Malayalam speaker in the middle of that translation. That's stunning. That's amazing that they're figuring that out mathematically, algorithmically, statistically. That's mind-blowing, and we should actually be in awe of that. The other side of demystification is giving us the ability to then ask hard questions about whether something is proper or appropriate for a particular context. And so once you actually understand, or you try your best to understand how things work, then you're in a position to say, wait a minute, I don't think you should be doing this. Or, wait a minute, I think there's a better way for we the people to pursue a public good, which is, I think, a more important question. And so the demystification, not only of getting away from this worship of Google, which I think has ebbed significantly. When I started this book, it was really hard to get anyone to pay attention to the fact that Google was just another company. These days, when I say Google's just another company, everyone's like, oh yeah, of course, right? Because we see all the things that they're screwing up, and we see how nervous they are about Facebook. And it makes sense, Google's a company now. But back then, 2004, 2005, way back then, people worshipped Google. It was stunning. It was amazing to me. So the demystification is something I think we need to do in all cases. So this is what I do with my students. I do my best, not being a technological person, but try my best to explain what goes on in a computer. What sort of operations are there? What processes are going on? What, in a simplified fashion, what does a computer do? Why do we call it a computer? How did we get here from a mainframe that would fill this room into this little guy, and this little guy is 1,000 times more powerful, more than that, probably 10 or 100,000 times more powerful than the mainframes that would fill this room. That's stunning in itself, in a really short period of time. And I often do it autobiographically. I talk about the Commodore PET I used in high school to program Hangman and Hunt the Wumpus, and I talk a lot about Hunt the Wumpus. And you may remember this game that you could program yourself as like a Dungeons and Dragons game. It was pretty hilarious. And I talked about my first Apple II computer, and then my first Macintosh, and then my first Windows 97 machine, because Windows 97 was so cool, right? And then, how it all works up into this thing, and how the iPhone is very different from this thing. And if you probably don't have as much time as I do, because my class is all about this stuff, right? But that is, I think, one of our key duties here, is to try to, the best of our ability, explain how these things work, to give everybody the ability to master the system rather than be mastered by it.
Hello, I'm Dominic. I'm sorry for asking again.
Well, I hope this is, I have to catch a flight, so this probably should be the last question.
Yeah, and when you talk about Android, I'm really curious about that, because I'm using Galaxies as with Android 2.3.7, and I'm really curious about Android 4.03.
Okay.
And I know that about 8 years ago that Google bought Android, and 2 years ago Google bought the mobile department of Motorola. And now I'm just curious. I know that it's very obviously that Google used their $12 billion to buy 1.7 patents in the mobile part of Motorola.
Right.
But I'm curious that why not Google combine the Android system with the hardware of Motorola? Because I think that this is a real Google and a truth against Apple, just like Apple. Sure. Because Apple have their operation system and have their hardware, so now iPhone 4 is really famous.
Yeah.
And I believe that Galaxy S2 and Galaxy S3 is with hardware is Samsung's, but the system is Google's, right. And it's very, very successful now. So I'm curious why they don't combine them, and if this is why.
Google doesn't tend to share stuff with me. So they don't. I don't really know. I mean, they don't return my calls. No, I mean, look. Why Google bought Motorola's mobile system? A lot of people ask that question at the moment when it happened. Is Google trying to move into the hardware area? Maybe, maybe not. Google has a lot of cash. Sometimes it buys things to make sure other people don't buy them. Sometimes it buys things for something 20 years in the future. Sometimes it buys things just to get a few patents, either in a strategic sense of trying to block other people from exercising those patents, or for trying to develop something based on those patents. There are probably a dozen reasons we can't know. They're trade secrets. So we don't actually know why Google does everything it does. And that's true of every major and complicated company in the world. But one thing we do know is that Google is constantly looking 20 years in the future. And that's actually refreshing, because most companies don't look past the next quarter. Google wants to make sure it's relevant in our lives, again, the operating system of our lives, 20 years from now. And I think that that's actually a healthy thing. I wish more corporations look 20 years in the future, but it's also important for us to recognize that our relationship with the company has to be guided by that long-term vision as well. All right, thanks very much for hanging out.
Once again, thank you very much, Siva, Dr. Vaidhyanathan, and thank you for coming to Knowledge in the Digital Age. We're looking very forward to seeing you for our next year's program, and when we decide what that's going to be, we're going to be sending out notices. Siva has generously allowed us to videotape the presentation. Once we have it up, we'll be sending out a link out to CUNY via the CUNY Academic Commons and also through various listservs. Please feel free to enjoy the rest of the refreshments, and once again, thank you for coming.